Welcome to the Out on a Limb podcast. We are all interconnected to a greater web of consciousness. Our aim is to open your mind to a new world through having open-minded discussions about what we perceive our reality to be.
Well, hey, where are you guys located?
Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we're gonna have to connect in the future because I did finish the book. Okay, and I don't have it with me. It's in the other room, but I have probably a dozen bookmarks in there. Of course, I'm interested in the Mars topic, but so I eventually want to follow up with you guys on that and just do the inverse of what we're doing here today, because I found it. This we'll say territory is new for me, but I found it interesting that there were every so often I was reading the book, and maybe if I didn't understand exactly what was being communicated, every so often there'd be something very specific that hooked me in. I'm like, ooh, okay, that's really resonating with me. I've heard this before from somewhere else. And I was drawing correlations between what was presented in the book and things I've heard elsewhere, things I've read elsewhere. So, at this point, I was, we can get into this. I just, chit-chatting before the show.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I just feel like I wanted to communicate to you guys that I found the book quite compelling. And I was just even telling Ginger yesterday, like, you gotta read this last chapter about the pyramids. And, so there's quite a lot of interesting stuff there that I want to follow up with you guys on, but I need to do a little bit more homework on my end and summarize my thoughts.
Sure.
Before coming back to you. So we have another interview in our future the other way. So
I was thinking,
amazing.
Good luck on summarizing your thoughts, because you'll ask them something and you think that that's going to be the answer, and then no, 5 more come up. It just never ends.
It unravels pretty quickly once you start diving into it. I know that when we did our book study at the beginning of the year, we had 12 of us online from around the world, and we were taking chapter by chapter, and each week it would reveal something new. And even for me, for the one that channeled the information, even going, I didn't go back and read all that stuff immediately. That was the first time I actually dove into it. And there were some chapters I just could not read. Like, I could not physically get through the chapter. My brain could not lock into the information. But other chapters, it was as smooth as butter, and it just made sense. So I think that's the way it's supposed to be, because there is a lot of energetic transmission within all of it. And if you just don't resonate with it, well, come back to it later. It definitely will hook in. So
I think a lot of times it assumes a basic level of knowledge already.
yes, I'm like, I need the intro to this book. What is the 101 version? The intro to channeling and to the 12, the clusters of 12. I felt like I was missing a lot, but that's okay, because there was enough in the book that I, bringing in other experiences, I was able to connect with. And of course, when we were speaking with Phil, Allison, just the whole Mars connection. Of course, that was when we first, talked. But there was enough there that in the book about Mars, which I found fascinating.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode. We are super duper excited for our current guest, as we have been all this year. Cory Dobbs is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. His most recent work is Blue Planet Red, a groundbreaking film on the history, the evidence for life, and catastrophes that contributed to the death of Mars. Welcome, Brian.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, guys. Pleasure to be here.
We are so excited to have you. We alluded to your existence, actually, after we got back from the With Phil UFO Fest. And we talked about our adventure there and how much fun we had, and that we had met you, and we talked about and gave kind of a little bit of a, I don't know what you'd call it, a little teaser on your movie, and the links there a couple of weeks ago, I think, is when this one.
Yeah. I watched that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, cool. And so I think people are going to be excited to actually hear from you in person. I know that I'm super excited to talk to you in person as well. Yeah. The movie is fantastic. For those who haven't watched it yet, there will be a link below this episode as well.
Yep.
But and Samantha watched it last night, so it's fresh in your memory. I watched it a couple of weeks ago. I don't know how fresh it'll be, but it's interesting because the first half of the movie dives into whether there currently is life on Mars and how do we define life, for example. And the second half, which was more compelling to me because it was about, was there life on Mars before? And for those of you who have read the origin story, you know that the Martians have talked to us about how they raised us, essentially. They raised humanity on Mars at that time. And so there are still remnants of all of that existence and other existences before humans were even thought about.
Yep.
So we're going to get into all of that in due time. We're going to have an exciting conversation for you guys, and I'm so glad that you're here and that you agreed to talk to us today, Brian. Thank you.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I felt the energy there, right when we met there, Allison. So I'm glad you followed up, and I'm glad you gave me the book and you appreciated the movie. Thanks for watching it. There's a lot in there. So, I was aiming for 90 minutes, but I couldn't fit it all in 90 minutes. So I had to go more to 2 hours. So
No, it was not hard to watch 2 hours, not at all. Like I was so entrenched in it and just going, wait, what's next? What's next? But wait, there's more. It was great.
Yeah.
And I will say that one of the things that I absolutely loved about it is that you have a plethora of intelligent, well-documented people in the scientific community, NASA people, remote viewers that worked for the CIA or other organizations, credible people, Harvard trained and all of this sort of stuff. And they are on board with this idea that if there's not life on Mars right now, there has been, and so it's not like these are woo-woo people or people that are on the fringe. I mean, these are scientific-minded people, and I love to investigate where science and spirituality meet. Because I think it's just a matter of scientific people getting caught up with what we already know metaphysically, because they have to go through the scientific method and experimentation and all of these proofs, and trying to get physical proof of some of these metaphysical principles or understandings is difficult. What's your take on that?
yes, agreed. I credit one person for opening my mind up to this whole world of. Well, let's just put it this way. About 10 years ago, I wrote a screenplay, and I was developing my interest in screenwriting, and I wrote an entire screenplay. It was basically a hybrid mix between that movie Contact with Jodie Foster and 2001, okay? And I really wanted to have an ending that paid off and didn't make it sort of ambiguous like those movies did. And I was under this assumption that, there are no aliens. As much as I love the idea of it, I grew up watching Star Trek and Star Wars just like everybody else. But under this assumption that, based on our current limitations in rocketry and propulsion and how far it would take and distances between stars and yada, 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 that we have not ever been visited by aliens, blah, blah, blah. It's nonsense. Okay. So, I credit one person for, and she knows who she is. I credit one person for opening up my mind to the possibility of, well, there could be something more going on here. And I guess I started pivoting after I read Professor Avi Loeb's book about the Oumuamua object and how it deviated from its course and things of that nature, and his proposal that it's not a comet, not a meteorite, not a meteor, that it was perhaps something different, artificial and interstellar in origin. So that got me really thinking, because here you have somebody from academia who is sticking his neck out to try to have a different kind of conversation than we're used to having. And what's particularly fascinating is that I think collectively throughout the world, there are more of these discussions being had out in the open. I mean, just take you guys, for example. You guys now have a whole show talking about metaphysical, spiritual things. And it's interesting to see the intersection, like you were saying, Allison, the intersection between that world and the scientific method, if we can measure it and if we can see it, right? Where's the nexus point between those two worlds? And it does seem like that nexus is growing. It's it is difficult to really marry them overnight. But I think given that there are so many people now, like yourselves, like, the people I interviewed in the film who are studying things outside of the realm of, conventional science or perhaps just the mainstream science, and not to bash, I want to be clear here. When I say mainstream, I don't necessarily mean it in a derogatory way, because a lot of people say, you can't trust the mainstream news. Well, okay, look, if you're just coming home from work, you're turning on the local news, all right, and they're just reporting what happened in town, like, sure, that makes people feel good, okay? The local baseball team, what happened there, and maybe it's what happened in the city with crime or what happened with the community event. There's just certain things that people look for when they watch the news, that they want to feel connected to their community, okay? And there's a lot that doesn't make the news, whether it's because it's just too much for the average person to handle on an emotional level or whatever the reasons are. So kudos to the folks out there who have been studying a variety of different subjects outside of the realm of the mainstream, and who have stuck their necks out and trying to make the case for something that runs counter to the conventional wisdom. Because when you can come and you can back up what you're saying with data and evidence, then you can convince someone like me, who's a filmmaker, to say, hey, you know what? This needs to be a film. So, and that's what spawned this whole thing. I'm like, how come no one's made a film about this? And I said, well, Brian, you're a filmmaker. You could do it. But I have never done anything this big before. I've done short films. So I knew that in order to do this right, it would require a lot of time and a lot of money. But as luck would have it, I was just in the right spot in my life to be able to do something like that. And it's been fulfilling. So, and I'm happy that it's brought me places like, to meet here with you today.
It's interesting. We talk about, these guys kid about their skeptometer, like you're a skeptic a little bit. Skeptometer. We have a dashboard of different here, but one of them is that Will tends to be a skeptic, surprisingly, even though he's a channel. And he doesn't, just believe everything that comes down the pike. So it's fascinating to me that you were kind of a skeptic or agnostic about this idea of extraterrestrials or life on other planets or whatever until you started this project. What was your belief after the project then? How did it change, if at all?
Well, to sum up my belief after the project, I can't rule out anything now. I'm entertaining a whole lot more than I used to. Okay, I went in, me of 10 years ago was not unlike a lot of people here on Earth, thinking, well, you know what? I know everything. I know everything there is to know. Nothing new to learn. Sure, there might be some new information, but I've got a good handle on things. I've been around here for a while. But then you meet people who know things and are able to communicate those things in a way that you're willing to accept. And that's the trick. Because if your belief is here, okay, and you're trying to communicate something that is over here, maybe let's go even further. Both my hands on the screen still, right? Okay. If you're trying to tell someone over here that they need to be over here or that they should consider what's over here, you can't expect them to make that jump.
Right.
Okay, that's too much. It's too much.
Yep.
You have to meet them where they are and drag them this way. And that's how I structured the film. I had to start with what people know, and what people know isn't much. Yeah. And I had to let the viewer know that don't worry if you don't know anything. We're just going to start at the basics, start from the beginning, and then I'll give you the stuff that is like your 5 o'clock news segment. Okay, well, NASA wants to go to Mars, and we've had these missions and blah, blah, blah. People see that on the news. We send rovers, we send these things. We're familiar with that. We start with the familiar, and we start adding on things that don't challenge them too much. Just a little bit, and then we get it all the way to the end, which is, is, to your point, in an entirely different realm.
Yeah.
It's funny because I noticed with my husband. So my husband's sitting next to me, and like he's my greatest
He's a
fan
big
and
skeptic.
supporter. Yeah, he'll tell everybody, "Oh my God, my wife's so amazing at what she does," and yet he doesn't have a clue. So like he is just caught in that world, and it was really interesting to watch how he started off going, "Okay, what the hell," just like. It's just there's not that. I think it's a framework of understanding, experience, belief. Like your mind has to literally, you're massaging it to open up and consider the possibilities. And as you were talking about all of this, like what I kept thinking was with the scientists, which you did a beautiful job framing them, and and all their creds and how they relate to Mars and all this kind of stuff. But here are these people who are trying to entertain a greater discussion, like the what ifs, and here's evidence for the what ifs, and yet you can feel that palpable narrowing of academia, and you alluded to it, you said it once, where if they don't go along with the program, they lose the funds.
Yes. I think that point was made by Dr. Brandenberg, right? There's a rhetorical gun to his head, say this or else you won't get your grant money. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, and that is, I didn't make this for academia. I didn't make this for NASA. They already have their own beliefs and their own data and their own whatever, or points of view rather.
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to make this just for the average Joe who really, maybe he's heard something here or there, but I had to make this relatable to those who don't follow this stuff, because I knew I kept in mind how much I appreciated finding the people along this way who have been studying this for years. And I have to credit one person in particular. His name is Michael Craig, who was the producer and subject matter expert for the film. He's in England, and he's been studying this stuff for the better part of 2 decades. And so I really relied on his expertise and his wisdom to help me sift through the nonsense from the good stuff. And together with him, we crafted this film. And I think, he brought about half the people to the table, and I found the other half, and together we really combined our forces to put this together. So, but I knew that I needed to, I wanted to make this relatable to everyone, even if they didn't have an interest in space or this question about whether or not we're alone in the universe.
So, I mean, as I watched it, there were a number of times that, as you were interviewing the different, individuals, that what was in the back of my mind was, was there any moment off camera that they said, look, I can only go so far. I know a lot more, but I can only go so far. Did any of them ever allude to that they really do have a lot more information, but if they bring it out, it's just not within their sphere, it would cause,
Too much
problems or any of that?
Yes. Dr. Brandenberg, who is featured quite extensively throughout this film. First, I'll say that I did send him an email. I read his book. It kept me up for nights. And then I said, okay, well, this is the conversation I'm having in my head. Somebody should do something about this and make a movie. I emailed him. I found an email address and I emailed him. And then a few days later, I got an email back on New Year's Day of January 2023. And he said he would be interested in doing an interview for a documentary. And I said, okay, well, I guess I'm doing it. So, I'm just jumping right in because I just found the evidence so compelling. And there was a story here. So, getting to know him, speaking to him, and certainly he answered a lot on camera about his own research. But, privately off screen, sure, there's conversations that I've had with him that, interestingly enough, correlate to some of the things I was reading in your book. So, I'm happy to see when I can make these correlations between here we have somebody who's a plasma physicist who's, been in and out of government contract positions his whole life. He's someone who knows people who know things, right? So he's privy to certain information and he has sources for things and that sort of thing. And I only know just a fraction of it. So, and he's coming from his world, and people like you have, a different way of interrogating the universe, shall we say. And
I like that.
Great.
I like that.
Wow.
so when I am seeing the same more or less conclusion from two completely different fields of study, disciplines, I'm like, okay, man, there must be something here. Like, am I going to put my face and my name, and am I going to go to bat for it? Maybe not yet, but it's worth looking into because, like I said, I've heard way too much. I've seen way too much now to know that, look, there's a whole lot more that we don't really understand. Brian, you are not the smartest person on earth. You don't know everything, buddy. Okay? You must be a lot more humble than you ever were before now, and just really listen to what people have to say, and open up your boundaries on things.
And just wait till you see a UFO in real life. Like,
I know.
Then you're toast. Like, it's done. Is Dr. Brandenberg, is he the one who said, no, he can't talk about the moon?
Yes.
I watched the credits, like there were little, Easter eggs like throughout the credits, just little clips.
Yeah,
I feel like I need to go watch it again.
Oh yeah, that
Right.
was fun to watch.
That's funny because we, this is no secret that we talk to aliens, but the very first contact that we ever had was a fifth dimensional Zeta, the Zeta Reticuli, the little grays that people are afraid of. And he's a parallel of Will's. And so he came in first to introduce us sort of to the whole thing, this whole idea. But he's in fifth dimension, so he's a little bit closer to our human reality rather than the other dimensional beings that are up a little higher than that. And so we had these cool conversations, like friend to friend, because he's kind of like us, except that he looks green and short. But so we had these conversations, and one of the things I wanted to know was what's on the dark side of the moon. And I remember early on he said, I can't reveal everything. There's a lot going on that you don't know, but I can't reveal everything because it's not time yet, and it'll mess up the trajectory of where we're headed. So there is a lot, and I don't even know it all, and I wish I did.
But you're good at asking the follow-up questions.
I don't mind asking and getting my hand slapped.
Probing and
Interrogating the universe.
Yes,
That's fantastic. We got to remember that.
Right, interrogating. That's
That
right.
is so good. So
love that.
were you, so you weren't raised, were you raised with any kind of religious upbringing, or were you agnostic, atheist?
Sure. Yeah, no, I grew up in a Catholic household. I went to church on Sundays. It wasn't something that was precious to me, and I just sort of grew out of it. So I have a general understanding about, that religion, but nothing too in depth.
So in terms of,
I don't really know how that influenced anything, but
yeah, it may or may not have, but in terms of the woo-woo scale then, you didn't believe in life on other planets or ETs or whatever, but did you have a belief about other things like angels or ghosts or any of that?
well, let me clarify. For aliens, certainly I accepted what was the common explanation or the common presentation by, let's just say, NASA, that the universe is so large, and thanks to NASA we have these beautiful photographs, and they're able to measure things and really try to identify exactly what is this whole big bubble we're living in here. And so we can take these measurements of the universe and postulate that given the distribution of stars and planets and habitable zones orbiting around those stars, that certainly there must be life out there. Why would we be the only ones? Yes, I could say, of course, that makes sense.
Theoretically.
Yeah, sure. But, aliens coming down, and I love Hollywood movies, of course, but that's really the only thing that sells is alien invasion, which can be exciting for sure. But it's not the only conversation to be had, especially now that I know a whole lot more about this stuff. So, but this, I think it boils down to this. Angels and things of that nature. No, I never really gave it too much thought. It does seem now that there's another nexus point here about, well, what relationship do these mythological creatures and do these religious and historical figures and creatures have with the UFO phenomenon? There seems to be something developing there. Far be it from me to try to put that together.
No, that's your next movie. Your next documentary.
It fascinates me for sure, and I can't say no, that's not possible now that I just have seen too much. But my take home is this: is that it just, when our reality as humans is challenged, okay, when we are forced through a paradigm shift, and that is a difficult thing to handle for people, and people would rather just say, nope, I just want to look away, that doesn't exist, blah blah blah, I'm just going to discount that. It's just simply easier, and humans are creatures of comfort. They prefer convenience, they prefer the easier way. Not everybody, but a lot of people do, so I don't necessarily blame them. But for those of us who are naturally just a little bit more curious, and who are open, and who can find the right person to communicate that to, because I myself, of course, was skeptic and stubborn on things, but it all comes down to communication. Storytelling is really important on this.
Yeah.
And so if and I think I said this in the film, but if the history of our solar system might be different than what we imagine, what we've been led to believe. And I think that's a worthwhile discussion to have. So it's important that we do have these blending of disciplines, not just looking at Mars, for example, and talking about its geology. There's only so much geology we can talk about. Rocks. NASA, there is more to Mars than just rocks. Okay? And we're not making this stuff up, it's your data. So
yeah.
Well, and you kept coming back to, all of the scientists, like, why aren't we going to these specific locations that have these interesting objects, and it does, it kind of leads everyone into that, why not? What the heck? What's going on here? Like, it was getting kind of frustrating.
Well, not to put the conspiracy hat on, but it's easy to put a conspiracy hat on when you see these things that are so evident, whether it's through, observation through telescopes or whatever, and you see
The big face.
things that are anomalous for a barren area, and yet you would think that'd be the first place you go. But no, we're going to go over here. So don't look over here, look over here. So it's instant, it's easy to put that conspiracy hat on and go, they know more than what they are saying, and they're trying to redirect the conversation somewhere else. So,
It does seem like that. I think that's a fair criticism. That's why I tried to, as best I could, to try to frame this for the viewer as, look, this is just the data. What does this look like to you when I'm showing the images and things of that nature? To try to answer these questions does open up a can of worms that, frankly, NASA just may not want to deal with. So I want to be clear, NASA is wonderful. They've done great feats of engineering. They're an inspiring institution, for sure. But there are just some things that they'd rather not address. And I think that's unfortunate, especially given the climate of what we're experiencing right now. I mean, the UFO phenomenon, and the film doesn't delve into that really, but I think it's adjacent to that, is blowing up right now. I mean, we're, during the last Republican, one of the last Republican primary debates, they asked Chris Christie, if you were president, would you disclose, what we know about UFOs? And he's like, you're giving me the UFO question? He made it, funny. But I mean, to see it elevate to that level, is like, we're living in a unique time period. And I find that particularly inspiring.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we don't know the rationale behind any of these organizations who withhold information. Best case scenario, like we've heard before, perhaps they're afraid of our mass reaction to these things, because this would upend the structure of every society on the face of the earth. It would upend religion. It would upend government. There'd be no need for those things. And so, not to mention the chaos and panic, perhaps. So we can't assume to know why they don't want to tell us these things, but it's obvious that there are things that are not being disclosed.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's that whole, conversation of a paradigm shift. It would be a complete paradigm shift in our humans' existence if we actually knew, quote unquote, knew everything. And so that's even why when we channel the higher beings we channel, or we channel a higher self or whatever it might be, there's only a certain amount of information they still bring forward, because they know if a higher self or a galactic or an angelic or whatever it might be brings forth just a bit more, that could set off a whole chain reaction of events that
Humanity
aren't
is not
ready
allowed
for that.
to know things they're not allowed to know yet.
I think there's truth to that. And because we sort of touch upon this in the film with the Brookings Institution report, in that, NASA was advised in the 60s, look, if you find evidence for aliens, like, be really careful with how you disclose that, almost to the point at which maybe don't. We're just up to you, NASA. We're just saying, like, it could cause, given historical precedent, it could cause mass chaos, mass panic. And if you're in charge of a country or any community and you've got that accountability, like, sure, you might want to handle that with care. Like, do you want to be the guy who says yes, and take that risk? And I think if you're a politician, you try to avoid risk. So I understand why.
But what's interesting is that it's not just the U.S. and NASA; it's every government throughout the globe. So how they're all on this,
so that's how
on the same page
you
here.
can't not be a conspiracy theorist, because that's a conspiracy.
Right.
To not.
When you leave things unsaid, that's when our minds start developing all of these theories or whatever to make up for what we're not knowing.
Right. Right.
This is precisely why, and this is what we hear from our guides, is that disclosure is not going to be this thing where the government blesses it finally and says, yeah, you guys are right, there are aliens, whatever. They're not going to do that. It's going to come from within each human. The same way it happened to you, it's going to happen to lots of people, and it is happening already, where you're either going to have contact in your dream state, you're going to see a UFO in the sky, you're going to have these, whether it's plant-based medicine types of consciousness experiences or just meditative experiences.
An epiphany.
You're going to have your own direct experience of this type of thing, and you're going to know it to be true. Because even if the government came out and said it, you're still hearing it from a third party. It's not your own direct experience. And so disclosure is not coming from without, it's coming from within.
I was just thinking,
I think that's possible.
I had this one moment where we were doing this, meditation thing, and I've got this mantis being, like, I'm doing a meditation, but this mantis being in front of me, and he's talking to me, and I think I know what he looks like, but I don't really. And he's like, so how would you feel if we suddenly just appeared in front of you? And I'm like, yeah, bring it on. We can handle this. And so all of a sudden there's like this cityscape in front of me, and he shows me himself right in front of me. And my first reaction was like this, you know? And he just cracks up, and he's like, no, that's not how we're going to appear. And then he showed like how there'll be humans, but you'll have a sense. You'll be like, oh, this is a mantis inside this human. Like, that's one way in which they'll reveal. We'll just have a knowingness.
Yeah, I do think these extra, which dimensional extra.
They like extraterrestrial rather than alien, but they are extra dimensional, yes.
Yeah,
or
extra dimensional beings. They don't want to short circuit our systems.
Right.
That would defeat, a lot.
Yeah.
So I get that. I get the withholding. If you're on that side of the coin, like, what level of interest do you have in humanity and wanting to see them succeed? You want to give them just as much as they need to know, but not too much. It makes intuitive sense to me.
Can I go back to something with the movie? If there's something I want to ask. Yeah. Okay, so when you were getting into the whole, the section, like there's several sections, and this is like the middle to if there's 4 sections, it was like the third, I can't remember, but, and you were talking about these shapes that like have these proper mathematical dimensions and so forth. I mean, there was stuff I never ever knew of, like, and certainly that thing that the engineer had to, he did the reverse engineering on, which just was like, because it's kind of like, what else could this be? But in that whole segment, like, was there so much more you learned and you had to cut it down? Because I could have spent an hour. I could have had you just go down that road for you need to do like sub documentaries of each of these sections, because that was so flippin' cool. I mean, I never knew there were like pyramid-like shapes there. Because it doesn't
I
tell
know.
us.
And let's repeat that for viewers. You know, maybe your audience, this is yesterday's news, but you know, when I first heard the phrase pyramids on Mars, you know, at first I'm like, oh, here we go, come on, like really. and then I got to credit Graham Hancock. He has a book on Mars, and so I think he co-authored it with a couple other people. And it, you know, got me up to speed with the Viking mission and the orbiter photographs depicting what appear to be these strange structures, pyramidal shapes. And at that time, they were using, you know, that book was published in the 90s, so those photos were quite old. They've since taken much higher resolution ones. But this word, pyramids on Mars, that unsettled me. This phrase, pyramids on Mars, that unsettled me. I was like, oh man, like if there's any truth to this, there just seemed to be enough to, you know, keep me reading the rest of it, and I just kept on looking into it because we're not talking about mountains. We're talking about something that has shape, symmetry, geometry to it, design. What does that mean? Maybe it really means that, okay, Mars isn't what we were told. There's a whole lot more going on to it. And how do you dip your toe into this question of whether or not there was intelligent life on Mars? You know, that's the other thing. Mars has a lot of baggage with it. Unfortunately, you know, I knew that going in, thank God, because, you know, I will even talk to people who follow this UFO phenomena, okay? They're all in on UFOs, and then I bring up life on Mars, and they're like, yeah, right.
That's funny.
You know, and arguably there's more data to support what's being claimed about Mars than there's about, you know, we have reports here on Earth about UFOs. We don't necessarily have a whole lot of data, but there's a lot of data backing up stuff about Mars. So, you know, this conversation about Mars, but yes, this you were bringing up, Samantha, you were bringing up, you know, these structures. And if you do, fortunately, we have expertise by the likes of Dr. Mark Carlotto, who analyzed this thing known as the DNM Pyramid, named for the two people who discovered it, the DiPietro and Molinar, Vince DiPietro and Gregory Molinar, the DNM Pyramid. It is this unique 5-sided pyramidal structure that is about 3 miles long. That's huge. And if you were to take it in Photoshop and cut off one half of it and then just flip the other half, it matches just the normal picture. Once you what they call orthorectify, which means account for any, if the photograph was taken not on nadir, what they say, not right overhead, but once it is corrected, orthorectified, and you do the symmetry, if you artificially flip the symmetry, it matches what the structure is right now. So that's one type of quantitative analysis. Okay, it's not just, hey, it looks like it's quantitatively, we can analyze it that way. And then you start drawing lines and like, why does it have repeated expressions of 30, 60, 90 internal angles? That's a bit weird. I've never seen a volcano do that before. You know, volcanoes are a little bit more round in shape. Okay, why would Mars have just this one weird volcano or hill or whatever you want to call it, a mesa, something I don't really know? That doesn't make any sense. And when you consider that it is only 12 miles away from the face, which is the thing that, you know, brings most of the baggage, but they're oriented in the same way. They both point in the same direction. They're 12 miles away, and the face itself has these ways of quantitatively analyzing it, where you start drawing lines through it, and it basically, you know, you have to see it, but it has repeated expressions of 3, 4, 5 right triangles. And it has symmetry. Take the face out of the equation for a second. You just look at the surrounding perimeter, and the surrounding perimeter is defined by these repeated expressions of 3, 4, 5 right triangles and the symmetry. And he went one step further, being someone, an aerospace analyst. He is familiar with how to analyze satellite photography. And what they do is they have special software that you can run an image through, and it is able to tell you the difference between a tree and a tank, you know, when they're trying to identify artificial structures from satellite photographs. And they do this by measuring the difference between, how different an object is from its surrounding landscape. And when they put Cydonia where these two things are, the face, as he says, lit up like a 100-watt light bulb because it was so much different than everything else around it. And that's, what are the odds, and this is what he says, what are the odds of all of this happening right here in the same place? And my only point is this: shouldn't we go take a closer look?
Yeah.
Please.
William, to your point, right? It's like we could go there and take a closer look, but we choose not to.
Right.
I wish we used
Let's
LiDAR.
choose to go somewhere else because it won't introduce it. It won't prompt the public to ask us any more questions about it.
Right. Well, they're hinging their bets on this whole aspect of current life. Is there current life? So we're going to go to the most probable areas on Mars that could hold probable life, and that's going to be some sort of, maybe ancient riverbed or some place that holds, maybe subterranean water or frozen water or whatever. So they're trying to, because that's what everybody's, extraterrestrial life or life outside of the planet. And so they're going to go to the most probable areas of that. But there's so much more that would give an explanation to a greater whole of our existence in those areas. So it is a very interesting quandary why, we could probably all scream together at the same time on NASA's doorstep, and they're still going to send it to the river plateau versus the structure. So
and the water question is an important question because, or the current life question is important because that's what I think that's what most of the public understands that NASA is doing. Is NASA is tasked with the search for life, and their general motto is follow the water. Okay, because where there is water, there is most likely life. Unfortunately, specifically as it relates to Mars, they're not doing that. They have shifted their attention to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn because we have these icy moons out there, and we say, okay, there's a lot of water out there, liquid water, beneath this icy shell. We think there might be life there, so they're planning missions to go there.
Yep.
And as I was presenting in Withville, I'm here to make the case that we should refocus our efforts on Mars because it does have water. A lot of it is in ice form, but as Professor Richard Hoover says in the film, water is ice, ice is water. It's the same thing. All you do is add some heat. And he's been doing research on microbes for quite a long time now, and he's directly studied microbes that can live directly in ice, and they can, through the process of excreting their own natural antifreeze, melt the ice around them to absorb the nutrients. So that's why he says in the film, if we go to Mars, the polar ice caps of Mars, there's a 100% chance we're going to find microbes there, just given his study, because we find them everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. So why wouldn't we find them there? Because it does have a low atmosphere. So, so unfortunately with NASA, they're actually more focused with regard to Mars on the study, on the possible discovery of ancient life on Mars. They want to avoid this question about current life because it introduces too many questions, in my opinion. And interestingly enough, since the film, I released the film in November, actually. And since the film came out, I have learned of even more evidence for current life on Mars.
Oh.
It didn't make it into the film. So
part two's coming.
long story short, and
You can share now.
Samantha, to your question, I will. Samantha, to your other question about the reverse engineering part, you wanted to see more of that. I felt the need after releasing the film to continue working on this on Mars, and continuing to produce things. So, like you guys have set up a YouTube channel, I'm now, sort of restructuring my whole internet presence now to just solely focus on this.
Wow.
To continue doing the filmmaking, to continue doing interviews, and continue to tell the story about Mars. Everyone knows Coca-Cola, but they still have commercials. So just apply it here. Just continue to tell the story. You can't just make the documentary and everything's done now. No, you got to continue to tell the story. So I'm gonna do more specific. I'm gonna broaden the areas of interest, which is where you guys come in, because it looks at Mars a different way that it didn't really analyze in the film, and go a little bit deeper and have long extended interviews and things like that to really essentially the sequel is just the ongoing series. Nice. What I'll continue doing.
Yay.
One of the nice
Well, I was going to ask, just kind of going all the way back to the beginning of our conversation about the movie. You said you had your first interaction was around January of 23. So how long did it actually take for you to produce the entirety of it to get it out in November? I guess just from January to November?
Long.
11 months, yep.
Wow. Is that fast? That seems really fast.
That to me seems really fast. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know.
One could consider that particularly fast relative to modern film productions. Yes.
Yeah, but to secure all those interviews and do all that, that's.
I got lucky. I really got lucky. Maybe the universe was working for me or something, because
that, and I think a lot of these academics and a lot of the different people, I think, are eager to start talking about what they actually know. Meaning,
they now
not
have
just
an
their academic body of evidence, but truly what I'll say, from the woo, the spiritual side of things, of what's inside them that drives them to this end, right? They feel it in a way that they know it's the truth, so they want to get it out, but they've been held back by the academic umbrella. And so they can only say it a certain way, but now they—
to certain audiences.
Now they have a broader way of being able to speak it because of the UFO phenomenon that's kind of easing the edges off of kind of our reality point. So now it's becoming a little bit more accepted. So yeah,
Which leads to this next question then. Considering all the personalities you worked with, what was your take in terms of their metaphysical understanding, or was it purely scientific always? How was their personality towards you, who really had no body of knowledge about this? Were they open to you? Were they arrogant? How did they react?
Fortunately, most of the people in the production were quite happy to be interviewed and talk about their work. A lot of these guys have sort of been marginalized throughout their careers, and even Dr. Mark Carlotta, who there's no shortage of people dismissing his work on this, and he's just a nice guy. He's just an average guy. Just like everybody else. I mean, he's a brilliant guy, but he's not crazy. I met him. I can vouch for all these people, and it's important to me to, first of all, when I was getting into all these different fields of study, that I was able to vet each, topic myself, getting comfortable enough to, put my reputation on the line for this sort of thing. So. A lot of these people were happy. As far as the spiritual aspect of it, I really think we only got, we dipped our toes into that with the remote viewing segment with Lieutenant Colonel Tom McNear, and I spent a whole day with each one of these people, and I spent a whole day with him and his wife, and we were just, he was telling me all about the experience he had in the Army and what they were able to discover there, and I was like, I got to his place ready to set up an interview, and then he then proceeded to interview me and give me a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation on all his work. And it was all prepared, had my name on it and everything. I'm like, wow, I feel pretty special here.
Nice.
And then we got to the interview.
He was a colonel, I believe, right?
Lieutenant Colonel?
Yes.
That's a typical Lieutenant Colonel briefing at that point.
Yes, yeah. I got I'm like, okay, cool. Because he wanted to vet me. He wanted to make sure that I was going to take his stuff seriously, which was good because it just adds to his credibility. He's not a crazy guy, and that's the thing. Army means something to people. The U.S. military means something to the average American. I mean, whatever they're doing, we must take it seriously because it's the Army. So I had that going into it. I had that credibility factor going into it. Mm-hmm. But talking with him after the interview, he was talking about his personal experience, and his wife was talking about her personal experience too. And I'm like, I know they're not crazy people. There's something going on here. And with regard to remote viewing and remote sensing and things of that nature, and fast forward to a few months, or rather just a few months ago, the film was in a film festival, and I called my old college buddies up. I haven't seen them in a really long time, and one of them comes up, and he's a pretty religious guy, Christian, and we go to lunch afterwards, and we start talking about all this remote viewing stuff, and he's like, "Yep, remote viewing is real." I'm like, what? I would not have expected you to say that. So he's like, it is real. And then he gave me some things to look up. So, it just does seem to be an aspect that, hasn't yet been given a fair shake, like a lot of the rest of the work of these people. It just, in my opinion, just hasn't been given a fair shake. So, were there some people in the film who didn't like the work of other people in the film? Yes. So, we had personalities, shall we say, that dismissed the work of somebody else, but which causes me internal struggle because they don't want to be associated with that. And I'm sitting here looking at, look, you just did 30 years of research on this one thing. So did he. To say that the other person doesn't know what they're talking about, I just think that's being a little unfair. Okay, there has to be something, there has to be some connection point here. And I'm not taking everything from this person and everything from this person. I'm taking, what I can use for Mars, specifically, but what I know that has been backed up by their decades-long research on all this stuff, and I can present it to the viewer. I'm like, look, I'm not just making this stuff up. You can go look it up for yourselves. So...
Well, Lieutenant Colonel McNair is very well known in the remote viewing world. So for any of our audience members who are into that sort of thing, definitely look him up.
Was he the one they based Men Who Stare at Goats
That's
on?
what I was going to ask you. Do you remember that?
Yes. I think there was... I can't remember what, but we did talk about that. I think there was a... that movie was based off of this remote viewing program.
Yeah.
Oh, but not off of him. Okay.
Was it off of him? I don't know if it was off of him or not, but off the program.
Do you remember who that was? The one that was the main psychologist or whatever?
I don't remember.
I was about
that
to
at
say,
this
it's
point.
George Clooney. Come on.
Yeah, George Clooney.
Well, he was a student of Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann is was the one who started up the remote viewing for the Army, and who's now deceased. But I heard stories where they would remote view classified material in a safe that was 100 miles away.
Yep.
And all of a sudden it caused a panic because they thought there was a leak and yada yada yada. And Tom's telling me all this, and I'm like, man, this is some crazy stuff, man. There's some stuff going on in this world that I just I am open. I am just on a receiving end right now. I'm trying to do my best to communicate what I've learned, but also keep an open mind because I know. Look, there's probably a whole lot more that I haven't heard yet. So,
Well, there's the Monroe Institute is doing a lot of.
That's in your neck of the woods, actually.
Yeah. So
Oh,
are you
yes.
you're familiar with them, right?
just through the process of the film, yes, because they were doing some of these sessions there with the other guy, Joe McMonagle.
Yep.
So can I ask another question?
Sure, of course.
I have so many questions. So in the movie, another thing I found really, or documentary, I guess the best way to say that, what I found really interesting that I had no clue about was that there's a huge difference between asteroid impacts and lightning, or it's not just lightning strikes, it's plasma strikes.
Right.
Is that a better way to put it?
Yeah, I'm 3-4 months into the production of this film, thinking I've got this whole thing figured out. I'm going to put together this magnum opus of the Mars film, and then I actually have to credit Professor Robert Schoch, the geologist from Boston University, to say, hey, look, you might want to consider including this in your film. I'm like, what is this? And the Thunderbolts group are proponents of what is known as the electrical universe theory, in which what the universe and the planetary bodies, everything that we see, is governed more by electricity, electromagnetic forces, okay, and having less to do with what we know as gravity. So it's an interesting field of study. There's a lot of data to back it up, and I was happy to see Dr. Brandenberg, who's a plasma physicist who has his own conclusions about Mars. Actually, he was quite sympathetic to this electrical universe. But what we are talking about is electrical. What does this mean, electrical discharge? And yes, when we look at craters, we assume they're meteor impact craters. And I find it so compelling that, well, this phenomenon known as electrical discharge is, it's what a lightning bolt is what, when you shock your hand on the door handle. It's scalable up to planetary, up to solar system, up to galactic.
Crazy,
It's just scalable. And, if you have, so we present this in two different ways. There can be electrical discharges between planetary bodies. If they come in close enough together, negatively charged planetary body like if a comet comes too close to a planet, let's just say, and they're of opposite charges, there could be an electrical discharge between the two. Okay, that's one way of doing it. What Robert Schoch talks about is having a plasma discharge, like a solar outburst from the sun itself, can cause the same type of effect on a planetary body, causing this electrical or plasma scarring. It's all the sort of the same kind of plasma electrical scarring. So whether it happened from a planet, whether it happened from the sun, I don't know, but it's clear that the scarring that we see on Mars, these impact craters, or rather the craters on Mars, weren't just caused by meteor impacts. It's clear because they can reproduce a lot of this stuff in the lab. I just gave the 101 version of this in the movie, but the Thunderbolts group has, entire video series on this stuff, which, anyone interested in this, I would direct them over to them because they have done their homework on this. And my jaw dropped. I'm like, oh my God, like it can explain a lot of these weird anomalies on Mars. Like, why does Mars have all these strange rock shapes? We're not talking about the things that could possibly be, artificial objects. We are talking about strange rock shapes, of which electrical or plasma discharge can explain because they're able to reproduce it in the lab. And I show laboratory footage, so I'm like, why isn't anybody talking about this? This is incredible stuff.
Oh, like the smooth glassy surface in the one area. But then the other thing was that the huge, like I had no idea it had that huge, that huge crater,
Yes.
like Grand Canyon kind of thing. That was
right. There's that huge scar, the Valles Marineris scar, the signature scar that's the size of the United States. And, they have a whole 90-minute documentary and they devote probably 10 minutes on this scar alone and how electrical discharge, it was shown in a lab, how you can reproduce this through electrical discharge. And it's quite fascinating.
Wow. See, and where my mind goes with all of this is, and I think I told you this in a previous email, Brian, is we know that the reason that there's not life on Mars now that in the way that there used to be, there might be microbes or whatever, but there's not life the way we used to know it is because of this planetary war, which again, I'm not asking you to believe or scientists to believe, but anyway, our understanding is there was this war. We've always been warring. And so there was a particular time when Mars was knocked off its axis and Earth was brought into axis such that life could exist on Earth at that point. So there was a mass exodus from Mars to Earth to bring all of the humans and the Martians who were assisting us here to Earth. So I wonder, I don't know for sure, I haven't ever asked this, but I wonder how much of that electrical activity had happened during that time. And so some of those scars and craters and fissures and all of that happened at the time when the warring, because they're fighting with energy, just like in Star Wars. They're not fighting with regular weapons. And I think at that time they might have even used some sort of nuclear type of activity out and about. So I wonder how much of that was caused from war.
Yeah, well, this is where we need to get these few experts and get them all in the same room to talk, because there is this nexus point here that I think speaks to all these things that you just raised. Because when we take take a look at the work of Ev Cochran, who was a contributor to the Thunderbolts project, he had the longer white hair and he had the dog, out in Iowa. Okay, he's a comparative mythologist, and he goes through all of the the historical texts here on Earth about all these different cultures across the world, and he analyzes their symbols and their texts and finds similarities between these cultures who had nothing to do with one another, had no contact with one another, yet they're all marking down the same story. They're all drawing the same picture. What does this mean? So he's trying to, and basically what it boils down to is that the sky that we see today is not the same sky that the ancient people here on Earth saw. And what they attribute that to is the solar system being in a different configuration than it is today. Now, I don't know enough about it to really speak on it, but I'm trying to learn more about that, because this is backed up by data of which I have yet to familiarize myself with. Okay, so if the solar system was in a more unstable version configuration than it is today, and you have this phenomenon known as electrical discharge between planetary bodies, yes, of course that could cause these things to happen. With regard to the galactic wars, okay, I have never heard that until I read the book, but I this seems obvious that it syncs up with what Dr. Brandenberg's research demonstrates. So,
I'm sure you'd love to hear that.
well, I'm thinking here, like, okay, if I tried like heck to find someone I could interview on camera about his research. I went to NASA, I went to NATO, I went to Los Alamos, Los Alamos, and I even tried to get a nuclear physicist from Georgia Tech to try to sit down on camera with me and talk about Brandenberg's research, and nobody wanted to sit down and talk with me. The Georgia Tech professor did exchange a few emails with me, bringing up what is commonly responded with, which is, oh, well, it's a natural. What Brandenberg discovered was the product of a natural nuclear process. Okay, of which there is one here on Earth. We know that in the African country of Gabon, there are these things called the OOAL. It's a uranium mine. Okay, they have a uranium mine. And millions of years ago, water seeped into this mine, and it actually did start a natural nuclear reaction. Okay? It didn't explode, but we know this because we can go and study the geology there and understand that there was some form of a natural nuclear reaction that sort of just fizzled out. Okay? It's the one known example of a natural nuclear reaction like this, besides the sun, of course. And so this Georgia Tech professor saying that's what happened on Mars. I'm like, well, okay, no, that can't account for that type of reaction. Not all nuclear reactions are created equal, and he should know this. There's this. We're getting into the weeds here, but this matters. There's what's known as R process and what is known as S process. Okay. S process is the physics that happens inside a nuclear energy facility. Okay, we have a nuclear power plant, all right? S stands for slow process, slow neutron absorption, how the neutrons are being absorbed into the nucleus of another, okay? So, and R for rapid neutron absorption. And what we see on Mars is evidence for rapid neutron absorption, R process, and you can only have R process in two different ways, either through a supernova or a thermonuclear weapon. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you rule out the fact that it wasn't a supernova that produced all of this excess gas, xenon-129, then you have to consider the alternative, which what Dr. Brandenberg presents as these large planetary catastrophic weapons. And he's got so much other data to back that up, and I think he dates it around, 250 million years ago. He keeps adjusting it here and there, but, it's utterly fascinating. And to even blend these two worlds together here, because I asked Professor Robert Schock, could a plasma discharge contribute to the, could that destroy the atmosphere of Mars? He's like, oh yes, no question, it could, if it was sufficiently large enough. So that's why I present two different ways that the Martian atmosphere could have been destroyed, because what NASA will say is that it was just the solar wind that has been stripping it away over time. But Dr. Brandenberg points out that the rate at which it is stripping it away, it cannot be fully accounted by just the solar wind alone. Something else was in the mix. And so we explore these two different ideas. Dr. Brandenberg, lastly, he pointed out to me that in the mid-20th century, when they were doing these nuclear weapons tests here on Earth, that there is actually footage. You can go right now on YouTube and type in and search for this one particular video, which shows a nuclear weapons test. It's an airburst. I mean, they detonated it high up in the atmosphere, an airburst nuclear weapons test that actually generated lightning. And this phenomenon is known as nuclear lightning. And there's black and white film footage of this, okay? So here we have the blending of their two theories. So I'm like, wow, like there's a whole lot going on here, and I find it interesting that this syncs up with what you're talking about in your book. So it's like, this is what I'm saying. I need to put my research hat on again and dive into your world and look at it from a completely different point of view and see what connection points I can make there.
Amazing.
It's going to be fascinating.
I'll use this moment to say that the extraterrestrials are watching, and they are not going to allow us to ever blow up our world through a nuclear blast. So anybody who's watching this, rest assured that if you ever hear anything about potential World War III with nuclear energy, it's not going to happen. There are many documented cases of extraterrestrials deactivating those types of things throughout the planet in the last, 75 years or so, because it reverberates out into the galaxy and it affects everything, just the way that the Mars wars and all of that happened. It changes the axis of globes and everybody would die. I mean, so they're not going to let us do it because it messes up everything else. That's like little kids playing with matches. They're not going to allow us.
Stupid little kids, whack.
That's right. That's right. So they got our number. They're watching out.
Yeah.
Allison, there's one other thing too. Even if you take the most strictly academic point of view about where life originated in our solar system, I think even most academics would admit that Mars was a habitable planet before Earth. And this idea of, swapping spit, as they say, meteorites contaminating, rather, I shouldn't say contaminating, but, when Earth gets Mars meteorites, okay, that shower down on our planet, Mars is also getting Earth meteorites from ancient impacts that just blew material up into space and finds its way on the other next door planet. So we've been doing this, for many millions of years. And so they even will talk about the possibility that life originated on Mars first and then was brought to Earth. So in an academic sense, that sort of syncs up with what you were presenting in the book, more from the channeling spiritual, or rather the historical perspective from the people you were channeling.
Yep.
So, even there's a correlation.
Well, since you brought that up, and knowing that you've finished the origin story, we can have a longer conversation privately, but I am curious your take on the Mars chapter, the Martian chapter. What resonated with you with the Martian chapter in terms of what you had learned after having done the documentary?
He hasn't put his thoughts together. He summarized his thoughts.
Still assembling, right?
What's interesting? I actually found all of the other chapters to be a little bit more compelling, because I was expecting the Martian chapter to tell me a little bit more about what you were referencing earlier in the book.
Well, with that, I will say, I don't want to interrupt you, but they build on each other and they were purposeful in sequence. So yeah, if you were to pluck out just the Martian chapter, it wouldn't necessarily make sense. So some of the things that I asked the Martians were things I hadn't already figured out from the other ones.
Yes, right. So
that might be why.
So if you take all of that and put it, let's just, connect, put all that together. I have like I said, I have a dozen little bookmarks in the book. We talk about Mars here, here. And this is really fascinating because I'm hearing bits and pieces of what you call the Mars demise. And I think in the Mars chapter specifically was when you were talking about the importance of the pyramids and how the pyramids here on Earth are, the pyramids on Mars came first, and then the pyramids on Earth, and they pay reverence to the ones on Mars. I could be making that up, but all throughout the book, I was surprised that it kept coming back to Mars and the galactic wars and the demise of the planets and the humans originating from Mars, coming to Earth and having the Martians there. Yeah, I can't explain it well enough, but there was a lot in there that I connected with, and I really want to explore that more. And I'm happy you came up to me, because if and this is what I posed the question at the end of the film: if there were others there at some point in the ancient past, I mean, that just blows my mind. And any way that we can examine the history about what happened to the planet, what was there before and what happened, and the remote viewing sort of gave us a little bit of this too. They went in search of a different planet to live on because theirs was collapsing. If I'm getting different data points from different points of view, and yours is included in that, that's awfully compelling. So it's in my opinion, that's why I want to continue telling this story. But as I learn more information, such as from your book, then it presents me with more material to make the case. You know what I mean? So I found it incredibly valuable. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I was going to mention, I wrote down about this idea of remote viewing. And, you said something about viewing documents in a safe 100 miles away or whatever. It could be anywhere. The safe could be anywhere because it's your consciousness that you're sending forward to remote view. And so consciousness is limitless and doesn't perceive time and space at all, which is also why extraterrestrials, it doesn't matter if they are however many light years away, because they're not traveling on a rocket ship to get here, even if it were to take many, many years. A lot of times they are using the nodes in our universe to kind of time jump or quantum jump into our field. And even if they have technology of a UFO craft, they're still using within that craft consciousness to guide it and steer it and commandeer it, if you will. But similar to the way you would take a piece of paper and fold it multiple times and then poke it with a pencil so that you go from one side to the other through consciousness, you're like bending the quantum field in order to travel. So consciousness is the key, and we either haven't figured that out yet or we don't care to figure that out.
And there was a lot more in your book, as I'm sure your listeners know, than just about Mars. And there were other things in there that really caught my attention. Obviously, the pyramid part at the end, thanks to William, your channeling there, that was quite compelling. And as it relates to what our purpose is here on Earth, and how we're planetary resets, as it relates to I guess this idea of reincarnation, and what is the point of all this? I mean, there's a lot to go through again, especially for someone who just got into it. So it blew my mind, really, and I just have to now kind of include this area of study when I'm continuing to tell the story about Mars, because I can't say, well, I don't want to make the same mistake that other scientists have made. Well, only this data is relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I need to not just accept whole cloth, but I need to take a look into other fields of study that have not really been given a fair shake. So that's my objective, is to really find the most interesting part of things I find most interesting, and try to tell it in such a way that can resonate with the public.
It's pulling on multiple threads at once to create a new picture, is what it comes down to.
Remaining open-minded.
Yeah, and remain. Yeah, well, I mean, by the essence of you reaching out to so many different, points of view, and researching them for your own interest, because that's ultimately how you're going to tell the story. You're weaving a brand new picture for, today's audience, if you want to say it that way, for those that really have an exploring mind, those that really that know at heart that, there is something greater. They just can't put it to words because they haven't been able to do the research themselves. You're pulling all those threads so that it's easier for them to understand it, and digest it, and make it more of a reality point now than it needed to be in the past. So
yes, and fortunately, these guys have been studying this stuff and doing their work for 20, 30 years now, and I'm more or less in a beneficial spot to, pull it all together. So fortunately, I have, I'm just in a position where I'm able to get everybody at the, into their well-developed theories and discoveries that they've got. It's not emerging anymore.
Right.
It's well established, and so it's just a matter of communicating. These scientists, man, I tell you, they think they can publish a paper, and then their job's done. The whole world's going to change. And this is my surprise, if we just go back to look at the microfossils, okay? I went down to Huntsville, Alabama, to the Space and Rocket Center to interview NASA's lead astrobiologist at one point in time, Professor Richard Hoover, and we're talking about this, the famous Allen Hills microfossil that Bill Clinton talked about on the press conference of the White House lawn. And, there's this famous photograph, and I'll see it in the news every now and then. And he's talking about all these other microfossils that have been discovered prior. I'm like, really? Why didn't I ever hear about those? You know, if there only was a picture. And so he then looks at me, he's like, huh. And so he whips out his lap. I'm sitting at lunch with him. The interview's already done. I'm going to eat lunch and then go. And then he's like, I'm eating my steak, and he's like, huh. He whips out his iPad, he taps on it, and he shows me a picture of these two diatom microfossils. And I'm like, I've never seen this before. You know, why didn't you bring that up during the interview? Like, what is this? And how come no one else has reported on this? And then it was then I understood that these weren't the only two. There's a lot more. So I said, okay, we got to go back to the Space and Rocket Center. I got to put you back on camera. That's why you see him in two different spots, under the rocket and in the black theater room.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just had this whole conversation with him over lunch about diatoms and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah, because that was mind blowing.
Yeah.
So, but you know, these two, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's a brilliant guy. I mean, you could hear him talk. He's just, and I had a heck of a time editing down his answers because he just,
I bet.
one question and then like 15 minutes later. But you know, he's brilliant, and if you work for NASA and you find microfossils in a meteorite, I guess let me get back to my main point, which was that the storytelling here, you can publish a paper, but you got to tell the story too. And unfortunately, they just haven't had that, and so that's where I thought I could come in and help them out with that, because I felt like there's a really compelling story here. And that's why a picture is worth 1,000 words. If I could only see a picture, Professor Hoover, he whips it out, and I'm like, oh, that's it. That's all I need.
Yeah. So that's where Graham Hancock has an advantage because he's doing the research, but he's telling the story and he's doing it so well. Yeah. Like it just, there's one thing I wanted to comment that I really liked how you said this. This is how I describe things, you know, whenever I'm in a client session and I tell them, like, I just don't like come out of the blue with this stuff, that there's a nexus of truth. Like either I've experienced it, perceived it in some way, shape, or form, or there's been so many bits of information and they come from such totally opposite ends and they cross somewhere. And in that crossing, that's like a note of truth. And I've experienced a lot of that when I first got to know Will and Allison. And it's just like, oh my God, so you guys see this. And Allison was just like, oh yeah, here, let me pull this thread for you. Let me show you this over here. And it was like thing after thing was building up, you know, it just, so that's a great way to describe it. And that's the fabric. If people can hold all of that in front of them and not just sit there and go, no, I only believe this particular thread. But if they hold all of them, then their mind's going to expand. They're going to have such greater realizations and so much more information is going to come to them. Mm-hmm. So you're, oh man, you're just at the beginning, I think.
Yeah, I know.
It is going to be exciting to watch his trajectory. So Blue Planet Red is the documentary. And I'm curious, I imagine you've already sent it to all of the interviewees. And if so, how was it received?
Oh,
yeah, you know, most of the people really enjoyed it. There's the only really negative feedback I got from the interviewees was, you know, the fact that someone else was in the film that they didn't like. You know, it wasn't really a criticism of the film itself, but really just the association with somebody else's work. But you know, I tried my best to distinguish, you know, people from one another. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to report that so far, not just with the interviewees, but with the general public, it has been received quite well. And, you know, I knew it was going to be a tough sell, just given the baggage we talked about before, you know, dipping its toes. That's why, you know, I'm on camera, like, believe me, I know how this is going to sound, but here's what actually happened. I'm trying my best to prepare the audience for what they're about to see. So I knew that I had to, you know, just like you watch any interview, right? And I'll go to 60 Minutes. I love 60 Minutes. But the interviewer's job is to get information out of the person he's interviewing, number one. But number two, it's also to be proxy for the viewing audience, right? The viewing audience is going to have questions, and it's up to the interview to ask those questions that he knows the viewing audience is going to want.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So
yes, this is the lady who's
I do that every time we channel, and I'm having to ask the tough questions.
And we're going, yes, she asked it.
Right.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So, you know, you have to put on your skeptic hat a little bit and ask that skeptical question of the person, you know, because then that gives you credibility. If you're just selling this and saying all this is true, just believe it, then I don't think that's going to be beneficial.
Well, it's a one-sided agenda at that point. Instead of having a broad spectrum, just open-mindedness to what's to be presented. Yeah.
I guess the only, I don't know how you want to characterize it, but there was criticism. Well, you didn't include people who had opposing viewpoints. And look, I tried to get NASA directly involved with this. Richard Hoover worked for NASA, but he's retired, so he now can speak his mind without fear of retribution. And I tried on numerous occasions, as you see in the film. Even JPL, we don't want to participate. So it's but the public for the past 30 or 40 or even 50 years has already been hearing the other side.
Exactly.
We read what NASA discovers. We read what they say, European Space Agency. We already know what their side is. Why do we need to include that in the film? This is all the stuff you don't get to hear about.
Right.
This is what they talk about with Joe Rogan all the time.
Right. So do you feel that if you're going to continue this conversation or continue this journey with this information, if it is, if it is received more and more and it does, garner some steam, do you think those approaches back to JPL and the different entities that you've tried to reach out to that responded, well, not this time? Do you think they'll maybe chime in on the next round or on maybe some other bits of information?
I hope so. I think it's my job to make a little, here's how I like to frame it. I say, I need to make some noise with this. And I think unless I make noise, it's easy just to dismiss it.
Right.
So, and I think that's where the YouTube platform comes in handy. I can, do what you guys are doing interviews and talking about this and periodically publishing things, because there's, I'm essentially redoing all the work before, but adding to it, broadening the scope and going deeper with things. And I've got 2 scheduled this month, specifically relating to this topic of current life on Mars and how this narrative that NASA has been selling since 1976, that the Viking life test results are inconclusive and that there's absolutely no evidence for microbial life on Mars, that's just not true. As I alluded to before, there is evidence, and it goes even beyond the Viking labeled release experiment from 1976. There's more to it. So, it's important to try to make a little bit of noise here, because I would love to, get them on camera, and maybe it's just a matter of timing, just approaching them at the right time. Once I've built up something that you can no longer be ignored, is
right.
The hope, I guess.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I just see them not wanting to associate, not wanting to give any kind of credence, because that's not where the funding comes from.
Well, I was going to say that's right.
And conspiracy theorist here, but I believe that all this money going into it and everything, their whole goal, or not their whole goal, one of course the main objectives is going to be, what can we find on Mars that we can utilize, that we can make money off of, that we can sell here that we don't have on Earth, or are running out of. Yeah. And so I feel like they're showing that they're doing the little rover over here, but there's rovers over here scraping stuff up and pulling things. I don't know.
Well, that might be the entry point, is this aspect of human colonization, because that's pretty popular. Credit to Elon Musk. He seems to give his opinion on things he probably shouldn't, but you got to give him credit for being a visionary and for carrying the flag for humans becoming a multiplanetary species, et cetera, et cetera. And so there might be a way in through that door to open up the discussion beyond just human colonization.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
And going back, you mentioned Avi Loeb, and I don't know if Allison, in your discussion in Withville, if she brought that up or not. Yeah, but her
briefly, you'd emailed him, right?
Yeah, about a Momo and what we had channeled about it, and it kind of correlates, with what he's saying, that it's a,
well, he knows that it's interstellar,
right?
And
there's some intelligence behind it,
related to extraterrestrial.
Are you talking about? Is that a meteor?
Well,
we've been saying it several times, and people who don't know are not
so
going to understand.
It's like this oblong, object that is on a trajectory through our solar system that
a couple of
a
year or two ago, maybe?
I forgot how long ago, but
over Hawaii somewhere.
but it has a trajectory that's unlike anything else that's come through our solar system. So
It's a probe.
So right, and that's in essence what it is. It's an intelligent probe that came into our solar system.
Oh, I
So,
guessed
yeah.
it right.
Yeah.
Like, I just,
And so what's interesting is you were talking about how scientists are invested in their theory or their research or their money or whatever. And so when I reached out to Avi Loeb and told him, here's what we got from channeling about that, in case you want
thanks.
to. He's like, thanks, buy my book,
You're right.
basically. Because, think about it. And this goes back to what you
And
said.
it makes sense. Yeah.
What Brian said about people being skeptical and not wanting to accept this new information, because think about what happens if you even accept that extraterrestrial life exists. That is not just one concept that you have to believe. Now that's going to impact every other like if you believe that, then you have to believe this and this and this, and it changes
It spirals.
your whole
you know who did
reality.
a good job on that? Like, I don't, Russell Brand, when there was some big thing that came out, where we thought we were on the edge of disclosure and all that kind of stuff, he had, on his podcast, he discussed, like, let's just have this conversation, because if this is in fact what we're seeing, then doesn't that just change the paradigm?
Yeah.
Isn't this something we should, like he kept saying, isn't this something we should explore? Isn't this something we should express? And he did it a couple of times, like this is mind-blowing stuff. This is like affecting people, and we're all being hushed about it, that kind of a thing.
Yep.
So it's,
Because even if you
is
believe that
huge.
NASA's not telling you the truth, or God forbid, lying to you, then what else is our government lying about? I mean, it just opens up a whole can of worms, and it changes, it shakes the ground that your stability is built on. And so it's very disconcerting, and people are not willing to go there. It's just not worth it for them.
Well, I mean, look where we are just in the divisiveness of our beliefs right now in the physical in the country, and and
Brian,
like
jump-
people just can't accept one thing or the other. It's either all this or all that.
Right.
So they
I
can't
wanted
do that.
Brian to jump in too. It
sorry.
looked like he was gonna.
Well,
in there.
just about whether or not what we can believe from NASA. What I've understood as I'm, getting into my 40s is that it's not a black or white world. To understand what's truly going on does require someone to understand how nuance works, and appreciate the gray area. NASA has made these wonderful discoveries and has illuminated our vision of the universe, which is great. But for whatever reason, they decided to artificially color the photographs of Mars. They'd get rover photographs and crank the red up. Now this sounds like, it's conspiracy stuff. Like, okay.
No, they colorize them. Yeah.
But they've owned up to this, and they stopped doing it. The Mars sky does change color, more or less how the Earth sky does, depending on where the sun is. Okay, sometimes it's blue, bright, nice blue sky. When the sun is setting, what do we see? We see more of orange and red and those sorts of things. But the Mars sky works the same way. But in the early days of NASA releasing photographs, all you would see is a red sky and red landscape. And so they were artificially coloring this just to sell this narrative that Mars is the red planet. For what reason? I don't really know, but you could speculate. Well, it's just to say, hey, look, you know what? We have to back up this claim that we're making that Mars is a dead planet, that there's nothing interesting there. We don't want to talk about life. So if we position it as an inhospitable world, it will be easier to sell to the public. That's just me speculating based on what I've heard other people doing. They've since owned up to that and have started releasing photographs that are true color, where you see a blue sky and brownish dirt, not so red. So if they're doing that, why can't we question whether or not they're, for instance, I've heard this other claim, photoshopping things out of the picture.
Exactly.
I've heard this. I haven't seen it too much, but I've heard it. So I don't know how much stock I put into it, but I wouldn't put it past them.
Somebody out there knows.
Well, there's got to. I mean, with the way the technology is now, with imagery and photo analysis and everything, I'm sure I'm sure the military has it, but I mean, even on the civilian side, that you could take a raw image that, if there has been some sort of manipulation of it, is to find the pixelization changes where something has been photoshopped out.
But will that story get as much traction?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it
gosh.
will nowadays a lot more, just because, everyone's looking for that thread to pull, they just, and what is it about, what's the name of the latest, not Hubble, but the other,
James Webb?
yeah. So I can't remember who I was watching, and they were talking about how, like, they're, all the pictures coming back from that are disproving all of these theories that, that NASA had on this, that, and the other. And so we're learning how little we didn't know. I mean, there were theories, you couldn't, and now it's all unraveling. So it's like really, really
Shaking things
fascinating.
up, that's for sure, yeah.
It's putting everything kind of in. I mean, I can't imagine how all the scientists who spent all that time are just kind of going, okay, are they're
Right.
well, they say they're still doubling down,
That's the thing. You take anybody who's studied something for so long and has published hundreds of papers on the universe being this way, for them to accept new information and essentially discount their entire career's worth of work, that's a hard sell for people. So you can understand human nature not wanting to just say, I was wrong, discount all of my career.
Exactly.
We're scientists are people too. So,
Yeah.
See, I don't know. I don't have as much of a problem with that because
But you don't hang your
Whole reputation.
your whole livelihood on.
all the things
All
I've
the
given
books you've
up
written.
for
Right.
it. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah.
But guys, we could be talking about this forever, and we've already gone way over. We want to honor Brian's time, and we might have to bring him back again after we've talked about the book and all of that sort of stuff, and to find out what he's working on next. Is there anything else you want to share, though, with our audience while you have them before?
Well, just to clarify, since the movie's out, throughout the rest of this year, the film is continuing its film festival circuit. So I'm still waiting to hear back from a dozen different film festivals. I just got accepted into the North Carolina Film Festival.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you. So the documentary is available, blueplanetred.net. And, it's my interest now to continue this work and to continue finding new people and to include in this story, such as yourself, because it adds a piece to the puzzle. And, I really want to build up an archive of work so that when anybody happens to stumble upon the page or the YouTube channel, that they can see, there's been a significant amount of work that's been done to back up these claims that Mars is something more than we've been led to believe. So, and I'm a firm believer. My process is a little bit more slow because I really want to try to capture these in high quality, interviews with people. I want to go on location. If I can't go on location, I'll hire a videographer, but I really want to try to present people in the best light possible. So I would try to retain a high production quality on these things the best I can, but it just takes a little time to do that. But it's all really fascinating work. So if you'd like to, follow me, you can certainly go to blueplanetred.net. I'm on Twitter or X these days, at Brian Cory Dobbs, as well as YouTube at Brian Cory Dobbs. You can also find me on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic. And all of that will be in the show notes.
Yep.
And we are honored that you came on to chat with us today. It was such a pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you to our audience for watching today. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up, like and share, hit the notification bell if you'd like, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
See y'all.